is the Inclusion Conversation. I'm your host, Grace Young Foster, founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. I'm an adoptee, I'm a foster care alum, and I'm passionate about elevating our communities. It's time we're included and visible in the conversations about work, careers, and just life. Let's be visible and let's be loud. Join me. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Before we start the show, just wanted to inform you that this particular conversation with Dawn Post, while it's really informative and educational, there's some hard content, especially for people with lived experience as adoptees and fosters, and those that have experienced broken adoptions or multiple home placements and relinquishments. And any parents out there, you know, this is hard content for you too. So wanted to make sure that you're aware that there's some to child abuse and neglect and other triggers in terms of trafficking and things like that. Nothing in deep detail, but definitely references to them. And so just wanted to let you know that before we started the show. As always, please seek out professional help and support and care that you may need if you're struggling with any of these things, if you have any experience with any of these things. And so there's a lot of great trauma-informed counselors, therapists, mental health professionals. Reach out to the Inclusion Initiative directly if you want any specific referrals. And thank you so much for supporting our show. Okay, on to our episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Inclusion Conversation. I'm Grace Young Foster. I am your host. I'm also the founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. Thanks again for tuning in. We love having you here. We love being able to share just such diverse and rich stories about our community with you. And today I'm really thrilled to welcome our guest, Dawn J. Post. I have been following her on LinkedIn, following her work for a little while, and it's pretty incredible, right? Just the vast array of stories that never really get told in our space. And what Dawn does is really advocate and elevate a lot of these untold, invisible stories, frankly, because they're really hidden from the public due to the shame surrounding, you know, things that happen in the adoption and foster care systems. And so before we get started, just want to remind you that if you are a fan of this show, please share this podcast with your friends, like us and follow us. And I really hope you enjoy this conversation. So to introduce our guest, Dawn J. Post is the founder of Themis Youth Law Advocacy. The purpose of Themis is to fight for abandoned and discarded youth, and to achieve this, they engage in legal services and advocacy to address broken adoptions, sibling visitation, and institutional child abuse and neglect in residential facilities for youth nationally and abroad. Dawn is an expert in children's rights, advocacy, and litigation. Dawn, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about these really critical issues that I think people are not as aware of outside in the general community.
Absolutely. I agree, which is why I reached out to you and I was like, you have to be on my show. Please come. And I'm so grateful that you're here and you're willing to just share your experience and just highlight some of the things that you've been working on so that we're all more aware that we all can be better allies to fosters and adoptees, and we can all do something about it. We'd love to hear just a little bit about your background. Tell us about your experience with adoption and foster care.
So I decided I was going to be a lawyer for children when I was 10. So that's a fairly unusual age to choose your career path. But I grew up in a very non-traditional household in the middle of nowhere, Maine. And so
I love that.
Yeah. So no TV, but unfortunately there had been a horrible fatality, a very gruesome fatality in the state of Maine, where a child had been returned from foster care to her biological parent and then was killed. And I must have heard it on NPR since we didn't have a TV, and I was also reading a lot of Perry Mason. And so in my mind, I decided if she had had a lawyer, then her fatality may not have occurred. So I decided I was going to be a lawyer for children when I was 10, and
Wow.
actually played a lot of Hell is for Children by Pat Benatar, and actually dropped out of high school when I was 16 to go to college and to speed up my career path, and was able to do that without a diploma or GED. And
That's
so I
incredible.
so I actually began working for legal services in Maine and won my first case when I was 18 in an administrative hearing, which is absolutely insane for me to think on. But this has been my career path and choice. It's not something I fell into. And so when I landed in New York, I was fortunate to, immediately become an attorney for children, and have run a couple of different programs in New York. And specific to adoption and foster care in New York, which is unlike many states, every child in foster care gets a lawyer. That's 0 to 21 if they're in extended foster care. And so I was very much aware about the issue of adoption when
Mm,
that is what is the pushes. That's what AFCARS tells us is the most
yeah,
important form of permanency, right?
right.
However, I knew, and certainly anyone in our field knew, that we see kids return all the time after they've been adopted. So we have this permanency timelines, and states get penalized, and adoption is also the only form of permanency that gets an adoption bonus for the states. And so it's all geared towards adoption. Yet, and I was sitting in these meetings, in these citywide meetings as a leader, talking about how to make adoptions go faster. And I was saying, how do we make them better? Because we all know that kids are returning to foster care and through the system in other ways. And so I really began looking at broken adoptions at that point, because no one wanted to talk about it in New York. I'm happy to say that's no longer the case, that we've shifted the focus in a different way, but that's what started my journey on looking at broken adoptions.
Oh my goodness. And I'm sure, the field has changed a bit since you first started. Tell us a little bit about, what it looked like when you first entered the field and started litigating, and some of the, changes that you've been a part of and what it looks like now.
Well, certainly, I first became an attorney for children in 2003. So that was coming, the crack epidemic was just behind us. Some of the theories around children and who had been born addicted to drugs, have since been disproven. There was a lot of talk in the 90s about the super predators, and
Yeah.
how children who had been born addicted would turn into, these raging monsters. And in some sense, I don't think we've actually escaped that, except we don't talk about it in the form of being born drug addicted.
Okay.
But adoptees in general get a bad rap. And particularly, and I say that because now what I'm seeing is this surgence of the diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder, which I think is really way overused and is not actually being diagnosed by someone who has the proper certifications to do that diagnosis. There are a number of people in the United States who, based upon their experience, for example, talk about reactive attachment disorder, and have really, and there's a religious component to it, where there's
Yep.
one individual named Nancy Thomas who talks about the devil being in children,
Yep.
and that, you have to be a harsh disciplinarian, and so in some ways we escape the super predator. But adoptees now face these other biases and prejudices against them, because you really uninformed and uneducated people who are pushing this diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder on everyone where it does not belong.
Yeah, and
And
I
so,
just I just want to pause for a second and just interject that, that oh gosh. I kind of pushed that out of my brain for a long time, but that was definitely my lived experience as a young person. I think on one hand, it was good to be able to recognize that adoptees, fosters do need support and help. They have been put into circumstances where there's so much trauma,
Absolutely.
so much
Levels
trauma.
of trauma.
Even if it's not like physical trauma, there's so much emotional, mental trauma that happens when you are literally separated from your first family and then placed maybe into multiples, like I was, right? Where all of a sudden those previous ideologies and therapies really demonized the kids
Yes.
and
Yes.
put all the onus on the kids for their behavior and their issues and their
Exactly.
struggles. And it certainly was not helpful in terms of us being able to come out of that as whole people, as confident people, as people who felt like we could be worthy of love and respect and acceptance. And so I appreciate you bringing that up because it's not a diagnosis that should be put on every single adoptee or foster
Absolutely
because
not.
it's not relevant.
I have always considered reactive attachment disorder. I'm thinking back to the Romanian orphanages. That's where the diagnosis, I think, really first came on the scene. And so I consider it to be a very extreme diagnosis.
Yeah.
In my experience from 2003 to 2018, never once as a supervisor or as an AFC, attorney for children, had ever seen a child diagnosed with that in New York. And then I became a class action litigator and I was investigating Oregon and West Virginia. And that diagnosis was on almost every child's chart. And so that was in 2018. And so that really took me by surprise. And that's something that as I've gotten into the international adoption work, have seen almost every child and there are actually troubled teen facilities that are only geared towards that treatment, quote unquote. And so, but also I'll say that a huge change that has been made that is positive is that we're moving away from adoption as the end all be all,
Yeah.
and that we are now seeing how do we support families to keep children in the home and really be able, and that could be financial support or other ways. But because so many children are removed due to neglect, not abuse, by far the majority by neglect, how can we alleviate those conditions to keep them home and in the community? And that's a very positive change as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I absolutely agree. And um, can you tell us a little bit about your involvement, especially in New York, right, where you helped change some of these policies?
So I wrote a law review article in 2011 and really focused on broken adoptions. I did a case study of seeing what children were returning to care or through other avenues. And so we ran a study in my office. And so by far we saw the vast majority of children that were in the guardianship of other individuals were due to the death or infirmity of the adoptive parent, which calls into question what age are people adopting? Do we have backup resources properly? It's illegal. We don't have legal commitments for backup resources. We just have promises, and maybe that needs to change. So I highlighted many of those issues. Another law firm that I was connected with when we started having conversations, they ran their own study. And for children that were returned to foster care in what's called voluntary placement agreements, they did a manual hand count of their office. And out of 1,000 cases, 1,000 kids, 200 were adoptees. That's 1/5
Wow.
of their
Wow.
caseload, which is a significant number. And then a homeless shelter, Covenant House, New York, they did a study and extrapolated they were seeing 120 kids per year. And so this, going around and getting others to buy into the conversation and say, this is what I'm seeing, what are you seeing? And then what can we do about it? And so those conversations started happening. And at the same time, or shortly thereafter, I did a law review article based upon one of my cases on post-adoption sibling visitation. And so that actually, this culminated in a national symposium where I had my clients speak. And at the conclusion of that symposium, the Office of Court Administration Legislative Director came to the young lady who was talking about post-adoption sibling visitation, and she said, "We're going to change this law." And that year, the law was changed to ensure that sibling rights are not terminated when parents' rights are terminated, to make sure that visitation would be a right post-adoption. Broken adoptions has been a much longer path. One of the issues that I've talked a lot about is adoption subsidy fraud and misuse, where adoptive parents continue to receive the adoption subsidy long after the child is no longer in their home. They can be on the streets. They can even be back in foster care, and people don't realize that. And the subsidy
Wow.
continues to get paid to the adoptive parent until the child turns 21. And that's due to some gaps in the federal guidance and the way that states are informed about this. So I first introduced legislation on this issue in 2017. It just was signed by the governor in December 2024. So it took us 7 years to get that legislation passed, but it did happen. And so this is conversation, and we're the first state in the country to do that. So I'm hopeful that other states will follow, because why are we rewarding and allowing people to accept money for children that they're no longer supporting or caring for? And the most egregious example I have of that is an adoptive father killed the adoptive mother, and the 4 children were returned to care, and he continued to receive the subsidy while he was in jail, electronically deposited.
Whoa.
Yes.
That's
And so
like
that's
just one example of just
one
the
example.
brokenness of the system.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And everyone knows it, but no one is willing to say, all right, federal government, change your guidance, make it clearer. Because one of the issues is, how do you define support? And if it's not defined, does a birthday card once a year amount to support? If you bought them a pair of socks, is that enough to justify continuing to receive the $4,000 per month? I would say no, but because of the way
Mhm.
that the guidance is written, it doesn't allow for it. And so states pay this out. Every state is doing it. You'd be shocked to know, but it
Wow.
is happening everywhere. Yes.
Wow. Yeah, I'm learning in real time from you.
Yes.
That's jaw-dropping.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is. And so I've been screaming to the rooftops since 2011 about that particular issue. And it took this long before we passed legislation in New York, which I'm incredibly happy for. And but also policy is only as good as practice. We can have the best laws, the best policy, but it doesn't matter unless it's really put into practice effectively. And that requires good leadership and good commitment.
Yeah, that was gonna be one of my questions is, you've helped create some change in the state of New York. Awesome. There's a lot of states that have to follow suit, right?
Yes.
Just in that one area.
Mhm.
There's many other areas that we need to tackle. However, like, how does the community who are allies to adoptees and fosters, who are really great parents trying to do their best for their kids, who are, supporters like you advocating for people in the system, how do we individually, collectively do something? What actions can we take to help with this?
I think that's a really great question, because actually, for example, this month is Child Abuse Neglect Month. I forget the exact term, but you see that a lot of governments are putting out these blue pinwheels and talking about our commitment to ensuring, to ridding ourselves of child abuse and neglect, and how can we assist in those efforts. And so that population of children gets a lot of attention. But as soon as that adoption occurs, people think, oh, it's the white picket fence dream. This
Yeah.
child must be in this beautiful home, and we've achieved that forever home and permanency.
And the
And
end.
so, in the end,
Yep.
for
Yeah.
all the clients that I'm working with, that didn't work out. And people have no idea how many kids are getting abandoned. And when I say abandoned, the initial group of adoptees, because my work has always been foster care and child welfare. And so my initial clients were kids who were homeless, and who had been kicked out of their adoptive homes that had been fostered previously. And so,
Okay.
and so when we have kids that are on the street, initially, and that's who I was working with, was primarily kids couch hopping, trying to figure out how do we get the subsidy and other support to them. But they weren't as compelling as kids in foster care. People are
Mm.
not as sympathetic to adoptees at that point, even though it's a name change, right?
Yeah.
And you earlier talked about focusing on the kids' behavior and what they're doing and their diagnoses, when we should be looking at the family dynamic.
Yeah.
What are the expectations that may be unreasonable that the adoptive parent is placing on the child or children? It's not about the behavior, but how are people reacting to that behavior? How is that behavior being treated or addressed? And so the question that I hate, and it comes up every case that I do, and every time I talk about kids that are being kicked out or in the troubled teen facilities, is what did they do that they were sent there?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, many of them are just normal adolescents. Normal adolescent behavior shouldn't justify getting sent away to an abusive program. And I saw this when I was doing foster care adoptions as well, where kids just having, they talk back to their adoptive parent, or they've tried alcohol or tried drugs, experimentation, things that I would consider to be, within the adolescent development, something you can expect. But you had older adoptive parents, or maybe for religious reasons, that said, I'm not dealing with this, and put them out of the home. And I had one adoptive parent where I was begging her with the child next to me to take the child back. And she said she just has bad genes.
Oh my
And so
gosh.
we have that kind of viewpoint of these kids, then there's a lack of sympathy and awareness and even knowledge about what's actually going on with them. And I would love to change that narrative. I kind of jokingly say I've never met a bad teenager. I've always really enjoyed teenage clients and liked my clients. And in the last year, I began working on more international adoptions. And that occurred because I was contacted about adoptees that had been abandoned in Jamaica after they were removed from a troubled teen facility. Now, of course, I'm aware of big residential facilities in the US, big conglomerates that are
Mhm.
really doing profit over care. It's all about the money. But I was not aware, and I'm ashamed to say this, and maybe it's because I considered initially the troubled teen industry to be kids that maybe I had in my mind the wealthy white kids, right, who are getting sent away for bad behaviors. I did not realize how many adoptees were in that population until I was contacted about this situation. And now I am shocked that it is incredibly high numbers in terms of the percentage of adoptees in troubled teen facilities. One study of wilderness camps has it about 30% of the population is our adoptees in wilderness camps, when they only account for less than 1 or 2% of the general population. I actually
Yeah,
think the
that's
numbers are much
incredible.
higher. I think that's
Yeah.
an underestimate. I think that's underestimated. And so anyway, so I began working with those young people who were straight out abandoned, left in Jamaica, put in the permanent custody of Jamaica, and had to really fight, and I'm still fighting on their care now that they've returned to the US. And so that I began looking at other facilities, and I discovered another facility in Jamaica called Youth Vision Academy, YOVA, that has almost between 160 and 180 adoptees. And they are connected to a facility that was closed in the US due to the torture of children in its care. And that facility was
Oh
called
gosh.
Miracle Meadows. And so we have a direct line of leadership from Miracle Meadows to leaving and opening in the Caribbean. And why do people open in the Caribbean? Why do we have these facilities outside of the US? Because there's no oversight, licensing, or regulation. And so I'm working with a number of survivors that were heartbreakingly, for example, I just met this young lady and spoke to her the other day, where she was first sent to a facility when she was 10, an international adoptee. And at she remained in facilities, and particularly outside of the country, for 8 years.
Wow.
And at age 18, after she had been warehoused without really gaining the education that she needed or life skills,
Yeah.
the ticket was purchased for her for the furthest point away from the adoptive parents. No plan on where she would go when she would land. And so you can imagine, with someone with no life skills that has been institutionalized, and what might happen. And it did. And that's heartbreaking. And can you imagine at 13 having someone come like Nancy Thomas in this particular instance, who came to her and said, your adoptive parents no longer want you. This is where you're going to be now. And remaining there till you're 18. And there are significant abuse and neglect allegations that have been told to me from these survivors that I'm working with, who are in emergency circumstances all over the country. And so, very long story to say that we need adult survivors, and adult adoptees who are more settled, more on their feet, that might be able to assist some of these younger generation of adoptees who are being warehoused and then dumped, literally, in the streets. And so some of the young people I work with, I just feel if they had a little nudge, everyone needs an adult in their lives, someone who supports you, is 1,000% behind you, and can just ask you simple questions. Like one of my clients asked me, what are taxes? And of course she would never have heard of taxes, because she wouldn't have heard her parents talk about it because she was institutionalized.
Yeah.
So very random things that you would think that we should all know, but adoptees who've been warehoused don't know. And so I would love to see more of a network of supporters, not just financial, which that would be amazing, but just even someone who can say, I'm willing to be a listening ear for you, and having that type of support as well. And that would be amazing. And because I'm working with kids all over the country who've been dumped in various ways. And so I began Themis Youth Law and Advocacy this past year as a result of the work that I was doing with these adoptees. And I never intended to start a nonprofit so quickly. I certainly did not intend on starting a nonprofit that was unfunded. But that's what I did, because I'm committed to this, and these kids needed help no matter what. And so I've been doing this work pro bono, and exhausted my 401k doing it. And so, I'm of course, hoping at some point that I'll be more funded to be able to continue this work, because at this point it's all pro bono, and that includes emergency assistance for kids. So when they needed to be put up in a hotel room, or they needed some food that I can DoorDash, or that I can, just help with a name change, any of the, all my flying around the country, that's also been out of my pocket.
Yeah.
So I would love to see support for the nonprofit, which includes not only the work that I'm doing, but the emergency needs for kids. But in general, I would just love to see a more coordinated group of supporters that can help these younger groups of adoptees that are being dumped, and who are amazing young people. I really enjoy talking to them. Everyone has this idea, like, what did they do? They must have been a nightmare. And they truly are not. They're just misunderstood and been misidentified in terms of what was actually occurring with them. Trauma responses being, thrown back at them as some sort of aberrant behavior, when in reality, it's a normal response given everything that they'd gone through. And unfortunately, many kids are dumped for not very good reasons, in my opinion. And so they are far, far cry than what they are portrayed to be. Certainly not those super predators from the 90s.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate all the work that you've done, all you've given, and just helping illuminate what the backstage is of these situations that we really don't get to hear what's truly going on in the system. Because these dominant narratives and dominant portrayals dominate. And so we hear it, we're like, all right, things are fine. Oh yeah, the government's pouring more money into the child welfare system. Great. And it's just like, actually, where's the money going? Like we don't dig in more, partly because it's scary too, partly because, right, we're so overwhelmed with all the news going on all the time, but it's really
That is
important.
true. This
Well,
is really
yeah,
an issue of so many in social justice that is so
exactly.
critical. And
It is,
so
but
it
we're a
does get
part of
buried.
it.
Yes.
We're a part of it. And what I'm hearing from you is people in our community, especially those with lived experience, that have the means, the resources, and have been able to heal
Yes,
and come out the
absolutely.
other side, with this, getting the support and care that we're never done healing. Like, as an adoptee and foster, I'm never going to be done healing.
No.
But to your point, right, I was able to have immense privilege of getting an education, finding my way through school. I've been able to just build a life for myself that just is literally not possible for others
Mhm.
that come through these
Absolutely.
systems,
Yes.
even though
And
I had a
do wanna and I'm sorry, but I do wanna emphasize the socioeconomic issues that accompany this and the judgment that happens because you see rich white Americans that are adopting, particularly from overseas, and we think, well, their lives must be so much better, and needing to change some of those narratives and not assume just because they're wealthy and white, they're treating their children well, and which is a very, very false narrative. And that's also contributing to kids getting warehoused and dumped, adoptees.
Yes, and not all the wealthy and white parents, but the ones that are creating these broken adoptions is
Yes,
what you're saying.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely.
and so yeah, but my response to you is that I hope everybody that's listening, everyone that's a part of the inclusion initiative, right? That's exactly why we exist, to be a support system to each other, because we didn't we didn't have it. There's still not enough. And we can do our part, right? By reaching out to helping one person,
Mhm.
giving, whatever we can at the time. Like, we
Mm,
don't have to do these big grand gestures of
exactly.
starting an organization or flying across the country. Like, we can literally take one action every
Exactly.
day, every week, whatever it is, and we can make small differences. And, there are resources like your nonprofit, like my organization, the Inclusion Initiative, where you can like be able to find avenues of how you can support and help. And
Absolutely.
so I hope that, parents that really care about this issue, allies, right, that you're going to look into Themis Youth Law and Advocacy and contribute and donate and see how you can support and help Dawn in her efforts. And, we at the Inclusion Initiative, like, we are mentoring, we are helping people with these life skills, professional development skills. We really focus on career and wealth building here at the Inclusion Initiative for adoptees and fosters because of the very points that you've
Mhm.
made. And yeah, I really thank you for doing so much personally that you really don't have to do, but because you've seen the system inside and out, you felt called to do it. And a lot of people, I'm sure, are asking you, like, why are you starting a nonprofit when there's so many resources in the system, right? Like, why are you
Mhm.
starting this? Can you tell us
No,
a little bit of why?
well, those 3 adoptees that I initially was trying to get back to the US was absolutely failed by our state, federal, and county systems. Not one of them stepped forward in really working to get those youth back. And one of them was a former foster child. And 2 were international adoptees. So in some sense, I was expecting that a state that had facilitated an adoption would have figured out some way of getting this young person back when they were adopted by the foster parent and who became adoptive parents and then abandoned them. And so where is the accountability? And so seeing that even on a systems level, let alone a people level, of how much we were failing these kids, and then learning about all these other adoptees that were abandoned in other facilities, yes, I was called to do that because no one else was looking into how to fix the gaps in those systems. And so while the emergent need was getting these kids returned to the US, then where do we go from there long term? Because they did not return to their adoptive homes, and I will say have really struggled since being back in the US. And a lot of that has come from the lack of supports and lack of knowledge around these issues. And that goes across the board now for all the youth that I'm working with.
Wow. Wow. It's incredible that this is still a thing after over 100 years of this system existing in the United States.
Absolutely.
It's just, wow. It blows my mind every time.
Yeah, the Child Protective System is designed to protect children. Why could they not protect these adopted children who were abandoned? Even when they land, if it was because they were outside of the jurisdiction, fine. What about when they landed in the US? I think I really reached a point when I was speaking to the federal government and they were talking about, well, let's send them back as unaccompanied minors, which means that we're making these kids stateless and countryless as if they're unaccompanied migrants coming back to the US. That wasn't done, but the fact that we even had to think about that is mind-blowing to me, because they are American citizens. And so, and then we have 180 others that are still in Jamaica in what I allege and believe to be very abusive and neglectful circumstances. And because I'm working with the survivors, and we're talking about sex trafficking, labor trafficking, really physical abuse, some of the same torture that the kids were enduring at Atlantis Leadership Academy in terms of physical exercise and stress positions also occurring at this other facility. And, Jamaica did the right thing by removing the boys from Atlantis Leadership Academy, but now they're confronted with 180 kids. And so I'm sure they're thinking, if we couldn't get those 3 abandoned adoptees back to the US, how could they possibly take on this other circumstance? And that means we have to change things in the US. It's not a Jamaica problem, it's a US problem. And so we need to figure out how to fix things here to be able to make sure that youth are treated properly. And we need to see accountability on not only the state, federal, and county systems, but also by the adoptive parents themselves. You should not just be able to dump a kid like you do dump a child at a pound. A dog at a pound. I think there are more charges brought against people who drop off animals and tie them to the side of the road than you would actually see based upon abandoned adoptees. And that is incredibly sad.
Yeah, that's horrific. It's really horrific to think about that is still the standard right now. And I wanted to ask, of course, if you're okay with it. I've been following your work currently with one of the kids from Jamaica, Jonah, and you've been an advocate, a voice, helping him have a voice, fighting alongside him in court. And for those that don't know, he had a broken adoption by a family here, a wealthy, very prestigious family here in the United States, and then was essentially just dumped back into Jamaica after they decided they didn't want to be his parents anymore. And so can you talk to us a little bit? I guess it would be great, right, for our audience to hear what that process is like for the adoptee, how and why it could ever happen, right? And then, of course, how do we support kids like that? How do we support lawyers like you? All of that.
So his situation is unusual in the sense that his adoptive parents were, the adoptive father is the former governor of Kentucky. So very high profile in terms of the case. And so Jonah is very aware of this, and in terms of the fact that he has a voice where so many do not have a voice. So it has been very important for Jonah to say, I am not only shedding light on what I went through, but on all these other kids. And, to give an example, I started a GoFundMe last year to try to get the 3 adoptees back. When there's not a high profile name or circumstance around the case, then I didn't receive $1. Jonah received generous donations, which is amazing. But then I have another client that also, has a lot going on, but has only received $100 based upon the GoFundMe I set up for her. We shouldn't give based upon name and notoriety. We should give because it's just right. And there are so many kids out there that are going through this, and I really want to emphasize that. And so he is trying to use his case and circumstance to draw attention to, the survivors that he's very bonded with, also from ALA, that are struggling in their respective states, as well as all the others that I'm working with, and bringing voice to those young people. But we are pursuing a case. Initially, we went to Kentucky to see if the Commonwealth attorney or the county attorney would would take on the case for criminal charges of abandonment, because our position is that the abandonment occurred in Kentucky because that's where the decision was made to leave them in Jamaica. And we ultimately moved forward because of the unusual circumstances of his case on an order of protection, have now intervened on the divorce case to say that Jonah has a right to have been supported during the divorce case, and maybe looking at other forms of accountability, such as, and I'm exploring this with other kids across the United States. And so I would love to also be introduced to attorneys in whatever state who want to help offer pro bono services to some of these young people who deserve to also have their day in court when they've been abandoned. I'm working with a number of adoptees all over the country who say, I was left in a place where they knew I was being abused. Something I call abuse by proxy. You don't hurt the child yourself, but you let them be abused somewhere else. And that was emotionally damaging to me and physically damaging. And so is there an opportunity to seek accountability for that young person by bringing what's called an intentional infliction of emotional distress or negligent infliction of emotional distress case? Or is there some other way, if we can't get state systems to bring cases themselves, that we could bring personal injury cases in order to try to get some accountability for that young person? Because adoptive parents get a pass, bottom line. We see adoptive parents dump kids in hospitals and facilities, on the streets. And if it'd been a bio parent, they would have gotten a case against them, particularly if they have other kids in the home. Here, nothing. It is so rare. And we need to move away from that thinking and hold people accountable for their bad actions. And so we're exploring a variety of ways to do that. Jonah is really the first that we are moving forward to do on that. But I also need pro bono attorneys in other states who, because I'm not licensed in every state, to be able to help bring these cases and work on them. So I hope to also gain a network of attorneys that are out there that want to work on these issues as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I will also say, we need to hold the placement institutions responsible as well. Absolutely. And hold them to a standard of properly educating and creating resources, whatever it is, right? Yes. So adoptive parents don't feel like they just want to dump their child. I don't believe that the vast majority of adoptive parents go into adoption thinking that. No. But then the challenges come on and they don't feel like that they can do it. And so we need to hold the placement institutions to a higher standard as well. It's a ripple effect for sure. So I really appreciate just everything that you've shared and helping to illuminate this issue, helping to elevate the youth and the adults that went through this, myself included. Like, I feel very seen by you. Thank you. And, just thinking back to, I can't believe you were 10 years old and you just made this decision to do this, to have this be your life's work. It's incredible. Yeah. Right. And just thinking back to your 10-year-old self, not knowing what you didn't know, but you saw that injustice and you're like, I am going to do something about it. What would you tell her now?
Oh, wow. Because it's been such a hard journey, because the majority of my work has always felt like I'm throwing myself against a brick wall with very, very little success. And I guess it depends sometimes on how you define success and how you define a win. And because we're not winning in foster care and child welfare cases. And so that's not the point. And sometimes those successes are small. It's that, You know, I have a client who just sent me a photograph of herself in a dress, and she said, "This is the first dress I've ever tried on outside in the real world." And so, just amazing, small, regular experiences like that, getting a kid, housed for a week where they got on their feet and could then move forward onto, more permanent housing. And so I would probably say to her that you're not going to get those, the wins and the successes are not the same, because the struggle is constant and it's real for Attorneys for Children. And I want to give a shout out to everyone who works for as Attorneys for Children, because it's an incredibly hard job. There's a lot of trauma involved, vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. And so I would tell her that the successes that you're going to see are probably more, on a human level, and much in connections, and these young people who I've had the joy of being able to see reach some level of success, which is really amazing.
That's beautiful. Oh man. Oh gosh, I can't imagine. But I'm so grateful that you exist and you're doing this work, and people like you are just continuing to fight for these kids, and really appreciate you. So now I want to transition into our rapid fire section. Is that okay with you?
I'm a little nervous.
They're fun questions. Don't worry. So let's begin our rapid fire. All right. What's your favorite food, Don?
Oh, see, in New York, we have everything. So I have my go-to places in Park Slope. And so I would probably say avocado rolls, is one of my go-tos.
Oh, they're delicious. Yes,
Yes,
yum.
they are.
What would you say is your superpower?
Oh, I'm very caring. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this work if I was caring. And so I think that is definitely a superpower. Sometimes maybe I'm too caring because I don't take care of myself as well. But yeah, but
Yep,
that's what brought me into the work, and that's what keeps me in the work.
Well, we really appreciate you and what you do. Okay.
Thanks.
You answered this already, but what did you dream of doing as a kid? Maybe before you thought you were going to be a lawyer, or decided you were going to be a lawyer?
Oh, well, at one point, I wanted to be a ninja. So my desire as a child under 10 was to be a ninja. Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, I wasn't exposed to TV that much. And so I had gone to my grandmother's, and we saw like 10 ninja movies in a row. And then I just decided, very stealth, and, it'd be amazing. I still want to be a ninja.
Well, you're kind of a ninja, right? For adopted kids and foster kids.
Navigating systems. Yes.
And fighting them. Yeah.
Yes.
Love that. Okay. So what's one thing on your bucket list?
Mongolia. I would love to visit Mongolia. That is probably my dream vacation one day, is to visit Mongolia.
Yes. Like just like culture and food, or just everything, or
culture, I think. And just, I don't know what draws me to it. And my travel is usually more, rugged, going mountain climbing and doing other things. And so I don't like doing just regular touristy things. I once swam in the Amazon with pink dolphins. I do not recommend it. I was sick for 6 months, but it makes a great story. Yeah, but no, for some reason that really calls to me. And the one thing I think people would be surprised to know about me, or maybe not, if you've seen, I actually have tattoos, is that I listen to a lot of metal music. And so there's this amazing metal band from Mongolia called The Hue, which I really love, who use traditional instruments in metal music. And so, yeah.
Fascinating. I'm going to have to listen to that. I can't even imagine that.
Oh, they're amazing. I see them every time they're in New York. So, yeah.
That's so cool. All right. Well, you're my first guest that has said Mongolia, so that's amazing. Yes. And then finally, what is a piece of advice that you want to share with our audience?
Wow, there's just so many things. I think, as you stated previously, that help can come in so many different forms. It's not the big gestures. It's not the $1,000. It can be, as Jonah's pot of the GoFundMe grew, it was $5, $10, $15, $20 from a lot of people who just gave what they could, and that adds up. Or it's, having a kind word for these kids, a kind gesture when they've never received that. And so all of those things mean so much. And I don't think people realize, what that can actually change for people. And so I would encourage everyone who's listening to be, if you can, help mentor or say, I'm really good at helping with a GED. I'd love to help a young person. There's so many different ways to assist.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dawn, for being on our show. Thank you again for the incredible work that you've done and you continue to do. To our audience, you can follow Dawn on LinkedIn, Dawn J. Post. Dawn has a plethora of publications that you should check out, educate yourself, right? Learn about the system and how you can get involved. I know that you are a pending author of other things, and so can't wait to see those come to fruition. And then check out themislawadvocacy.org, her nonprofit, and donate. Volunteer, whatever you can do. And all of this will be listed on our show notes for you. And again, please follow our show, like our show, share our show. And Dawn, it was a pleasure having you as a guest. Thank you. Until next time, everybody, take care. Bye. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe, share, and follow us. Check out our show notes to know where to find us on social, and our website is theinclusioninitiative.com. If you're an adoptee of color or a foster care alum, and you want to join our professional community, it's free, by the way, hit me up via DM, or you can find our email in the show notes. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.